What would it take to put U.S. troops on the ground in war-ripped Bosnia? President Clinton gave a new answer today. Reports from Bill Plant with the president and Alan Pizzi on the ground in Bosnia. Fire and death in Texas as a military plane crashes into an apartment building. Scott Pelley on the scene. And a key ruling on photographic evidence in the Simpson case. Bill Whitaker at the courthouse.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
Good evening. The President of the United States opened the door wider today for possibly putting some U.S. forces on the ground and in the crossfire in Bosnia. At the Air Force Academy in Colorado, the President said the U.S. mission could now include helping besieged UN peacekeepers regroup away from Serbian gunners and hostage takers. Bill Plant begins our coverage.
Bracketed by a show of U.S. air power, the president broadened the possibility that U.S. ground troops could be used in Bosnia, volunteering them not only if the United Nations forces need to pull out, but also, as the U.S. prefers, if the UN stays in Bosnia and regroups.
If necessary, and after consultation with Congress, I believe we should be prepared to assist NATO if it decides to meet a request from the United Nations troops for help in a withdrawal or a reconfiguration and a strengthening of its forces.
There are already 10,000 U.S. troops deployed offshore, including a 2,000-member Marine assault force. Mr. Clinton repeated his pledge that the U.S. will not send troops to take part in the peacekeeping operation itself. But he argued that he cannot leave the NATO allies in the lurch.
So I must carefully review any request for an operation involving a temporary use of our ground forces.
White House officials deny that using U.S. troops to help the UN pull back is a change in policy, and say that in any case, there's been no request for help yet. That doesn't satisfy Mr. Clinton's critics.
The president is getting dangerously close to committing us into a quagmire that would be very, very difficult for us to extract ourselves from.
U.S. officials say nothing is likely to happen for a while. But when it does, it's now clear that U.S. troops will be involved in what will almost certainly be a hostile situation. That may not be an official change of policy, but it's sure likely to seem like one when the time comes. Bill Plant, CBS News, Colorado Springs.
Secretary of State Warren Christopher has been in urgent consultations with the NATO allies at a meeting in the Netherlands. I spoke to the Secretary a short while ago about the possibility of deeper U.S. involvement in the war. If, underscore the word, if the President should decide that any U.S. ground forces would go into Bosnia, they would go in what role?
Well, they would go in the role of extricating the Allied troops, or conceivably, if they were in an enclave and needed to be moved, you can conceive that as a possibility, but there's been no request, and that's a very hypothetical situation. The President would have to review all those plans, and he would discuss them with Congress as well.
Now, more than 300 UN peacekeepers are still being held hostage, are they not?
Yes, they are, and Dan, we have condemned that. I must say it's a barbaric act that is a commentary on the kind of people they are there.
Do you agree or disagree with the hypothesis that goes the airstrikes, the most recent airstrikes, they directly resulted in the taking of these hostages and in retrospect were a mistake?
No, Dan, I don't agree with that. You have to look at how they came about. The real fault here you have to put in the Bosnian Serbs. They did the shelling, and now they've taken the hostages.
The Serbs say that the hostages will not be released until and unless they have assurances that there will be no more airstrikes. Is NATO, as of this moment, prepared to give those assurances?
Not at all. Concessions are not going to be made. You know, we've dealt with bullies for a long time. We're going to stand our ground, as the United States always does, in the face of that kind of threat.
Christopher also said he was optimistic now that the Russians would do what they could to restrain the Serbs. While diplomats maneuvered and more Western troops headed for Bosnia, the combatants in Sarajevo were back in the killing business. Serbs in the hills and Bosnian government forces exchanged vicious tank and artillery fire in the pre-dawn darkness. Meanwhile,